Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Welcome back. So this is a question that we've been thinking about and talking about for a little while. The education system in America, when did it implode, and why does it suck now? And what can we do to fix it?
I mean,
So,
at scale is the first problem. I mean, addressing the first problem, managing anything at scale gets out of
yes.
control very quickly. So that's
However,
start there.
there was a
Yes.
period at scale where it was working much better than it's working now. And first off, why do we have any ability to have opinions on this topic besides the fact that we're just opinionated and we have opinions? I come from a family that both my mother and my father worked for the school system. We were very good friends with lots of teachers. My mother was a teacher's aide for a large part of her career. My father worked for the maintenance department. But again, we knew all the friends and family were teachers, so I was surrounded by it growing up. Some of our best family friends are still teachers. Some of them are principals now. I was married to a teacher for 19 years who taught high school, elementary, and bilingual classes. So, and then, of course, I've gone through the school system. I watched it change significantly during my specific life, and I have a 18-year-old who was a special needs student who just graduated high school, and I have an 8-year-old who's still in elementary. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I mean, and I grew up with, my mom was a teacher. She taught at the private schools that I went to. That's how I got to go. She taught there, so I got half tuition, I think.
Reduced,
so she taught
at least.
kindergarten, pre-K. I know she was a teacher before. She went and taught in inner city schools right out of college because Texas had a program. I think it paid for all her student debt, so she did that for 3 or 4 or 5 years, something like that. And so she went and taught in inner city Houston and did that. And like, I don't know what age group that was, but when I remember, it was kindergarten, first grade. Once I went to high school, she went into another school, and I went back to public school and taught in first and second grade, I think, as well. Then my wife is a teacher, and so she's taught in in pre-K for forever. And
both
then
private and public.
both yes, both private and public. And then we've got a lot of teachers in the family, and I've sort of always sort of been in it, done a lot of education stuff with kids over the summer and programs and things like that. And then, I work in a job where I educate adults now. So sort of teaching is a thing that we do.
We both train people for a living, right?
Not to children.
Yeah, we both train people for a living, and I've taught, adult Sunday school classes. We both studied adult learning styles, and I studied adult, and with my master's program, I had to study a lot of that stuff. So we're not coming out of nowhere with some of these opinions. And also, my former mother-in-law was also a teacher, and I saw some interesting things that happened toward the end of the career. And this is no fault of her. I don't blame her for this in any way, shape, or form. But I'll start with this. She had left teaching, and she was an elementary teacher. She had left teaching because she'd been doing it for 20 years, or almost 20 years, and she was burnt out. And so she decided to go into real estate for a couple of years, which a lot of teachers seem to like do that and then come back. And then she wanted to come back to finish out the 2 or 3 years. And I don't know that for sure. It just feels that way. She needed to finish out like 3 years. And so she went back to the principal that she'd worked at, who she was best friends with, and said, hey, I want to come back. And they said, well, we don't have an open spot, but we'll make you the tech specialist for the like 5 elementaries or the 10 elementaries, and you can be our tech person. And nothing against my mother-in-law, but she could barely turn on a computer. And she was now their legit tech support for like 10 schools at one of the big Central Texas school systems with 0 qualifications as like okay, cool, this will be easy. And she used to blow my phone up because I worked in tech support back then. How do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? It's like I can't help you. I'm at work. It was a lot of that kind of stuff. Where on the weekends it would always be, hey, could you come to the school and help me out do this? And a lot of times I would go give them a hand because, and that is a big problem in schools. How much free labor is the school system depending on, right?
Yeah.
How many
Well,
times
I
have
mean,
you
let's
cleaned your
just
wife's classroom out for her?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I
Um,
mean, go beyond that. How many times have I helped my mother do that? I mean,
hmm
it's countless times. I mean, let so there's a million things we can get at about this, and teachers and compensation and pay is a big thing that we need to talk about. But I think I really want to sort of come back to this, and I didn't mention I also have two kids in school.
yeah,
Mine
one of
are
which is special
going
needs.
into fifth grade and going into seventh grade. And my seventh grader, he has dyslexia, he has
hmm
aphantasia like I do as well, though not as bad. We can talk about that on another episode,
Yeah,
but I found out
and
it's not as bad as mine. But so we've had to go through and make sure that he gets the help that he needs.
Mhm.
But so just wanted to cover that. But I think where I sort of want to focus is, we've been sort of kicking this idea around for a long time about, like, the four pillars of education and what's important in this, and
hmm
all this kind of stuff of. And I think the big thing that I've been thinking on the most is how we're not taking care of the boys the way we need to. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of aggression that happens in boys, and we've essentially put them into a situation where they're not allowed to let
yeah,
that
and
out. And I think that's a
let's
big
talk about that a
driver of a
little bit.
lot of things.
Let's talk, and it's not, and I do want to say it's not just boys. Girls just approach it in a slightly different way,
That's why I said
generally speaking.
physical.
Yeah,
Boys are usually
generally
physical,
speaking.
girls are different.
Although
Yeah.
I've seen some cat fights that are,
It
ooh,
happens.
buddy,
Yes.
the boys fights are more often. The cat fights are a lot nastier, is what my experience has been.
And boy fights are typically resolve an issue,
Well, they
whereas
used to.
yes,
Yeah, and so I want to start with that because again, I'm 5 years older. I entered the school system 5 years before you did, and the difference that 5 years made was
hmm
drastic. Because when I started school, corporal punishment was assumed and did not require parental consent. Now it wasn't bad. It was like, and it was mostly elementary at that point, but it was SWATs. That was and the other part of that was there were set, understood, known discipline consequences for inappropriate actions that we all knew going in, and we were told
hmm
fairly early on is not like the rules. If you do this, this happens. If you do this happens. And for every infraction, or relatively serious infraction, my parents would have been told, and I was more terrified of that than I was of
right,
anything that would have happened at school, which is why I didn't get in a lot of trouble at school, especially when I was younger. But the big thing was the bullying, right? When I was in elementary school, if a fight started on the playground, it was usually over in a couple of moments. They weren't long fights, and it was settled, and the teachers would just break it up.
right,
And if someone was bleeding, then they would like take him in and like, who threw the first punch? All
right.
right, that person's in trouble. Usually, usually. Now they would also ask a follow up question: why did you punch them?
hmm
Well, and sometimes the answer was they called my mom a hoe. Well, and I have seen the principal do something that would never happen today, where they looked at the kid and go, "You got what you deserved.
Yeah,
You insulted their
yeah,
mom, and they knocked you on your ass."
yeah. And
And
sometimes that
and
happens.
and you know what? In the real world, if you mouth off to somebody, somebody will probably pop you. You
Yeah,
know. But then it was done. And then
right.
there was the argue, 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 fight, best friends
Yeah,
situation. And
definitely.
that is natural. You look at most cultures, boys tussle, they roughhouse,
Yeah,
they fight. That's a thing. We have testosterone. It drives us to do this. And it's not just humans. It happens across, our closest
yeah,
cousins and even further out. You look at
yeah.
dogs fight when they're puppies and they learn to do it. Chimpanzees do it. apes do
Deer,
it,
deer
deer
do it.
do it,
Yeah.
and it is it
There,
is unnatural to
no,
force no confrontation, much less physical confrontation. This idea
right.
that we should all just sit down at 7 years old and talk out our problems is a modern social construct that we are not genetically hardwired for.
Right. Well, and I think there are some other things to take into account as well. So I'm reading a book called Super Normal Stimuli right now,
Mm-hmm.
and she's talking about in this book about a million different things. She happens to be talking about how um it's so random, but I'm gonna get see where I'm going, about women starting their periods earlier, younger and
Mm-hmm.
younger and younger. That it used to be like, when you go back 20,000 years, it was like 18, and now
Mm,
it's like,
nah,
actually, if you
I would.
they
Okay,
I'm not going to challenge her numbers. I'm just going to quote what she
fair
was
enough.
saying.
You're
But
quoting the book. You're quoting the book.
so she was saying that it was significantly older, 17 and 18, again, 20,000 years ago, well before we have any records. And that as we have started to domesticate animals and become more civilized, we've changed the foods that we're taking in, and now we're taking in significantly more hormones and all sorts of other things. And so you're seeing some girls, rare cases, are starting their periods at 8 and 9 and 10 years old now. It's actually
Yeah,
happening significantly earlier.
which is
So if
way
you if
earlier
you
than what I was thinking.
if
Um,
you look at that number when you're thinking about girls, now let's flip that over to the boys. If they're starting their stuff earlier, well, there's a reason why those 11 and 12-year-old boys are trying to kill each other now. It's
yeah.
because they're hopped up on testosterone like we were when we were 17, 16 and 17.
Yeah,
They're,
and
maybe it's not that
Maybe,
extreme, but I
maybe it's
think,
maybe it's that's a part of it. I think that goes into it too.
yeah.
Um, but there's also this pressure cooker aspect of it. If
Mm-hmm.
you want to talk about this rash of super violent extremisms, like somebody who goes in and shoots up a school. I remember the first time that happened. I mean, I was in school when Columbine happened, right?
Yeah.
But as I went through this school process, every year the rules got, well, stricter on fighting, stricter on this. The corporal punishments went away, and they began to peel away a lot of things, including our time outside
Mm-hmm.
as recess. Recess used to be like 45 minutes, and I think it's now down to like 20. And phys ed, PE in the elementary was an hour of us moving and running
Mm-hmm.
nonstop, which
Yeah.
required us to do push-ups and sit-ups and all this other stuff. And so there was almost 2 hours in the school day
Yeah.
that I was going nonstop until I got into junior high, right? And I am a firm believer in the rise of ADD and the rise of a lot of these inability to sit still and pay attention conditions, for
Mm-hmm.
lack of a better way to put it, is that these kids need to move. They need to
Well,
run. They need to play. They need to do things. And we're in the summertime. I can't make my 8-year-old sit still for an hour. How is he supposed to sit still for an hour in school?
exactly. Well, when I
Yeah.
was in high school, I did a science fair project
Mm-hmm.
testing exercise effects on ADD. I was in the midst of figuring out my own ADD. It was a really easy, it was simple and I realized, like, hey, if you exercise before you have to do work and you have ADD, it's actually substantially more helpful. And so, like, and then and you can look up a million studies now that all say the exact same thing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it's something that we all know. And that's this. Let's take a pause, time out for a second on this and shift over. We know some really important things about children and how they learn, and we completely ignore them. We know
Yes.
they need exercise to work, and we know they need to not start school at 8 o'clock in the morning, especially high schoolers. And we just completely ignore this because the school system is only there to watch our children while we go to work.
Yeah, it is a babysitting institution now instead of a learning institution. By and large, I am a firm believer in that now. And
And while I
I don't
don't,
say that to disparage the people who go to teach. Because
No,
I'm going to be
no
very
way.
clear about this. I have some of my closest friends who are teachers. You could not pay me enough money to teach some of
Mm-mm.
these kids because the first time one of them mouthed off to me the way they've mouthed off to some of my friends, I'd probably slap them across the face and then I'd
Yeah.
go to jail, and that would be bad.
Well, no, and I
And
just spent last week. I just spent last week teaching, just doing games with kids at VBS with
mhm,
three different age groups, and just at the end of that like hour that I'm doing that, I want to die. Like I just like
yeah,
I
it is just
they
so
won't they
stressful.
don't listen and they're crazy and it's fine and I love working with kids and it's great.
And
I couldn't do that 8 hours a day all
as a
day
profession,
as a professional. It's not something that I could do. And I
and
think I think the big thing here is that we need to reframe what we're wanting from our education system.
that's a huge
And
part of it.
I think a big thing we need to think about is one, as much as I don't want kids to spend more time at school, like in that idea, they need to be there all day. They need to be there a longer period of time, and we need to add in a full hour for them to sit and eat and talk with their friends, and they need to have time
You
to
know,
exercise in the morning, and
and
like
I'm going to
we
throw
just
something else out
ignore
there
this
that I think
stuff.
we should do. There is a tradition in South America and Central America where in the middle of the day, everybody shuts everything down and they take an hour to an hour and a half nap.
Yeah.
The siesta, right? And knowing my high schooler, one of the things he fought through was just a massive energy drop in the middle of the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so why not let all the high schoolers that we know are exhausted, and a lot of them are working after school and all the other things that are going on, take a nap. Give an hour. Why not? I would have loved it because one of the things I struggled with when I started high school, it started at 6:30 in the morning and I was done by 2:30,
Yeah.
right? I fell asleep almost every first period to the point where after my freshman year or after my sophomore year, I arranged because I had hurt my knee. I arranged to work with the athletic department and do a lot of their videoing and filming and stuff. So I had that class first, which had nothing to do. So I would come in and literally take a nap on the couch for the
Yeah.
first hour, and I did so much better with that extra hour of
Yeah.
sleep.
Well, I mean, there's a million. I mean, don't even get me started on sleep. We used to sleep way longer, and people would
Yeah,
wake up in the middle of the night and do things, and I mean, there's a million things on that. But
but I want to.
sleep is one of those things that like we we know children need to be sleep more and not have to get up so early to go to school. The other
Yes.
thing, and you said it is we get off at 2:30. It feels like that's like no one's off at 2:30. The only people who are done at 2:30 are people who have money and don't have to or don't have a spouse that makes money and don't have to work
Or they work in the school system for little or
or
nothing.
or they work in the school system. And
Because
so it's very
I wouldn't leave school at 2:30. I'd have to wait until my mom was done working
yeah,
at
same here.
4:30. So I effectively had like a 2-hour study hall. But they did that so we could. This is Texas. They did that so they could have a longer football program and do practice
Right.
longer and that kind of stuff. But I want to get back to kind of my initial point. We saw an erosion. I saw an erosion of discipline, and by the time I
Well,
had
let me
graduated high school, it had almost gone away. And I'll give, and with that, we also see a loss of respect for the teachers. It's a twofold thing. And I'm going to give you an example. I talked to a friend of mine, and I'm not going to say what school district it was, but I talked to a friend of mine, and this past year, this person had a student in their class who had been problematic throughout most of the year and was kind of like the ringleader for the other 4 or 5 really bad kids in that class. They mouthed off in a way that would start a fight anywhere, right? Directly to the teacher. The teacher tried to discipline them by writing them up, and they straight up said, "Look, you do this, I'm going to come to school tomorrow, and I'm going to shoot you, and I'm going to shoot up the rest of the people in this building." So we're worried about school shootings, right? This is a problem. People are screaming, take civil rights away and all this kind of stuff about this. Direct threat to the teacher in front of the entire class. Writes the student up, sends them to the office, and the office says, yeah, we're not going to do anything about it. We just don't believe him. Teacher has to go to the office and say, look, you can't let him back in the class. If you let him back into my classroom, I will absolutely lose control of all of these because they already think y'all are a joke. They already think they can get away with murder. And now they've threatened murder on a mass scale, and you don't want to do anything about it. They weren't going to do anything about it until they threatened to quit and go to the paper that day. And all they did to the student was move the student to another class.
Yeah.
So a school shooting threat, and they just moved them to a new classroom. Yay. Come on, man.
There's two sides to this because, all right, so let's take it back 2 steps. One, I was at the beginning of that change because when I was in,
you got caught on the
5th
wave.
grade, no, it was before that. It must have been 4th grade. I got in a fight with a kid at school. We were beginning of the morning. I was standing outside on the deck out in front of the portables, and some kid walked up and just punched me in the back of the head, wholly and completely unprovoked. And so I turned around and hit him back, and we had a scuffle, and we both got taken to the office, and we both got in trouble. And I sat in the office as a 4th grader, just befuddled by the fact that somehow I was in trouble for getting punched in the head. And it never
didn't make sense to you.
And so, they ended up we had to do a day of in-school suspension and a day at home suspension. I remember my dad being like, did you start the fight? No. Well, all right, then I don't give a crap. But I even remember at that point, like, sort of the injustice of that, of like, hang on a minute. Like, how does this make any sense? Like, why am I in trouble? Because I didn't just let him punch me again? Like, and so
they teach kids now to just curl up in a fetal position and let them beat you, which is not natural.
No. Well, I mean, I was just listening to Brendan Mulligan talking about a story on a podcast where he was sort of like, someone got in my face, and then I looked over and my fist was moving, and I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to punch this guy. And he's like, because it's fight or flight. It's not like you get to decide.
Lizard brain takes over.
Something in the back of your brain just goes, oh no, you're going to beat this guy's ass now. And you're like, oh yes, I am, and it just sort of happens.
Yes, that's why they call it a fight or flight response, right?
I don't remember making the decision of like, oh, I'm going to punch this guy. I just turned around and did it. Like it was,
And see, mine was a little different because I had scuffles all in elementary and all that, and it was never an issue. But by the time I got to junior high, like 7th grade, I was one of the smaller kids, and the no fight rules for whatever had kicked in. And I had a bully that I was trying to deal with. And of course, my parents were very different. My dad was like, just knock him on his ass, right? And we'll figure it out from there. And my mom's like, you should talk this through. And the guy lived like the street next to mine. So we had known each other for years, and he didn't like me and I didn't like him. And normally we didn't mess with each other. But and here's the issue, and it may seem small. It was he started, walking and walking by me, and he'd call me a faggot. And I was like, dude, quit. Just leave me alone. Just whatever. And I was blowing him off. But then it moved from that to shoulder blocking me into the locker every day. And I even went to the teacher, was like, hey, this happened. He's like, it's a crowded hallway. He didn't mean to.
Yeah.
And it went on for 6 or 8 weeks, and it got more and more. I was like, dude, you need to stop. Yeah. And finally the guy's like, what are you going to do about it? And shoved me. And, he had a good like 6 or 8 inches on me height wise, and he outweighed me by at least 20, maybe 30 pounds. And my parents and my grandfather taught me one thing. If you're going to fight dirty, right? Just, there's no such thing as a fair fight is how they would teach. Right. There's no such thing as a fair fight. And if you got in, and my dad had a Marine buddy who, or an Army buddy who was in Vietnam for quite a while, who said, if you've ever find yourself in a fair fight, you've done something wrong, right? And so I took that to heart. And the kid got off the bus one stop before me with one of his cronies that he was harassing me with, who also lived on the street behind me. And so I knew if I fought on school property or on the bus, I would get in trouble, right? So I just got off the bus right behind him, and he didn't notice. And I ran up and grabbed him because all the backpacks had the little thing, right? Ran up and grabbed him by the big heavy backpack and ran him headfirst into a tree. And then when he hit the ground, I kicked him until he started screaming and calling for his mama and pissing his pants. And I remember the bus driver stopping and running out going, "You've got to stop." And I actually remember stopping and looking at the bus driver going, "I'm not on school property. You can't do a damn thing."
Yeah.
Right? Now, I had gone to the teachers and told them. My parents had talked to his parents, and they had done nothing about it except, tell them, you're raising a crying wimp or whatever. And then I went home and I told my parents what happened after I kicked the crap out of the kid. And I told them, I said, "This is your one warning. Next time I'll hurt you." Right?
Yeah.
I think I hurt him, but, whatever. He was in school the next day, and he had no visible bruises, But, I kicked him in the gut 4 or 5 times. I'm not talking like a beat down like you see, whatever. The kid's dad had the gall to show up an hour later and knock on my parents' door and, say, you've got to control your kid. And my dad was like, "Look, I told you weeks ago, more than once, that your kid is harassing my kid."
Mm-hmm.
And the guy was like, "Yeah, and your kid kicked the crap out of mine." And he said, "Yeah, because I told him to. Do I need to kick the crap out of you, or are you going to get off my property?"
Yeah.
And you know what? After that, it was settled. It was never an issue again. He didn't harass me. I didn't get bullied by anybody else. Because it had started to spread. It had
there would have
started
been
to spread.
assault charges if that had
Yeah,
happened
now
today.
I would have been thrown in jail. But, and take it back a little bit further. When my dad was in high school, which was the 60s and the 70s, mostly the 70s, if the kids had a beef, they would actually take the kids to the boxing ring they had in the gym. Or if they didn't have the ring, they'd put the boxing gloves and the head pad on, and they'd have the kids go at it for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they would tell them, "I don't ever want to hear about this again."
Yeah.
It was settled.
Yeah.
And that's human nature.
We've gotten away from that, and there's definitely something to be said about a lot of these things. I mean, I think what we're doing with kids right now, and I know, is so unnatural for them. Go inside and sit in a room and sit in a chair and don't move and don't talk and listen, only listen. And and pay attention to what I'm talking about and all these kind of things.
Write on a standardized test and read this text, whether you know how to read or not, or do this worksheet, or do it in this frame. One learning style.
Exactly. I think that's what we've gotten away from, because I know, education started with essentially getting people to be able to read for the Bible, 1700s, 1800s. That was sort of the beginning.
Gutenberg kind of gave literature to the people with the printing press and semi-affordable books. And you're right. Most people learned to read the Bible because if they were going to buy a book, that was the book they would buy.
So the first Latin grammar school was 1635 in Boston, and then Harvard was 1636 after that.
Yeah, but that's Latin.
So that's sort of but that was sort of the first grammar school. It was the first grammar school.
I misunderstood.
And then really, so what really pushed education was compulsory education acts being passed in a lot of states that was requiring children to go to school.
A public education system.
And that sort of started the public education system. And then there was an act in 1862 that got some land grant privileges. But I mean, I really think, and you can get into the whole, um, what did the robber barons and the industrial tycoons have to do with the education? I mean, that's a
Yeah,
whole
that's
rabbit
a whole
hole
different.
to go
Yeah, we could go
down.
down that. But what did they
I mean,
teach back then? Like, what was the focus of the education? It
it
was
started with reading, writing,
reading,
and
writing, and arithmetic. So,
arithmetic.
so
Yeah.
the ability to read and write, because you got to know how to read the manual to do the thing, right? The ability to write down basic information, because if you're going to clerk or do anything like that, the ability to do
Mm-hmm.
something besides make your mark was huge, and basic mathematics, right?
Right.
Those three things. If you read, you write, and you do math. And then we grew that into a vocational system and a science oriented system in the 40s, 50s, the post World War II. Again, I'm going to come back to World War II like I always do. It's such a landmark moment. But
Yeah.
all of those GIs who may not have been able to read all that well or write all that well, I mean,
Yeah.
there was schooling that happened when they went through basic and stuff. They had to learn how
Mm-hmm.
to do that. So
Yeah.
we taught a massive amount of workforce. Not that's just the enlisted people, not even to count all the
Yeah.
people who had to come into the workforce to pick up the slack. But then after that, we saw advances in science,
Mm-hmm.
advances in chemistry and physics, and there was a lot of focus on that. But there was also a massive focus on the vocational aspects in school.
I'm going to say something crazy that's slightly off topic,
Okay.
but I heard this the other day when someone was talking about the rise of technology and everything post World War II, that it's all post Roswell. And just throwing out the idea, I wonder if we're attributing the rise of technology to the GIs going to college, and they're just correlated, and they're not actually, they're just causally both happening at the same time and have nothing to do with each other.
So
I don't. I'm just throwing it out there.
let's just say we got a ship at Roswell. We'll just for the
Yeah.
thought experiment. That would be a huge advancement in technology.
Right.
However, the ability to now go to university, the ability to get that paid for by the GI bills and
Right.
stuff, and that kind of stuff led to education for people who never would have been able to do it. And I'll give you an example. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was raised on a dirt farm. And for those who don't know what that is, it's a barely scraping by farm or ranch. This is what we call a dirt farm because there's not enough water in Texas. And made it through his basic schooling. Then he enlisted, and I don't know how he survived it, but he was a B-17 tail gunner and engineer. So he was either in the top turret or the back turret. Most of the time he was in the back turret. Had 3 B-17s shot out from under him. One time they water landed and skid into one of the beaches off of England. One time they parachuted out behind Allied lines, and the third time they parachuted behind enemy lines, and they had almost made it to Switzerland. But to get to Switzerland, this is a whole thing we could go into. To get to Switzerland, they had to get through a group of Nazis who were between them. There was like 20 some odd Nazis between them and the border. They only had like 2 miles to go, but it was Hitler Youth, and they could not bring themselves to shoot 12 and 13-year-olds. So they surrendered, and he spent the last year and a half of the war in a prison camp.
Wow.
Yeah. Out of that, he came out and he went to university, paid for by the GI Bill. He spent some time going to seminary, and then turned that into a career as a teacher. He taught a couple of different things, but one of the things he taught was shop. He was a volunteer fireman. I found out recently he was a part-time constable for Harris County, which I had no idea about. He was either constable or sheriff for the Harris County. But he did a bunch of stuff that he never would have been able to do if it hadn't been for the government footing the bill to get him through college.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't saying that.
But what I was getting at is the stuff that he learned
Right.
was a lot. But what's fascinating is the physics he studied in his master's program that he went through was the same physics that was in my high school textbook, and it wasn't even an AP physics
Yeah.
class. So we've been adding more and more and more and more and more harder stuff
We
to
have.
the academic side of things. But he made a living, and this is the point I want to make. He made a living as a shop teacher.
Right.
The shop is gone for the
Yeah.
most part. The
It
vocation,
is.
some of them are coming back. I've seen some resurgence of it, but by and large, I mean, I can remember when when I was young. My dad, when he needed work done on his car, he'd take it to the auto shop and buy the parts, and then the kids would fix it for free. He'd have to pay for the
Yeah.
parts, but that's the only way my parents, making not a lot of money, kept their cars running. Was the shop class was good enough at high school and
To
had a
fix a car.
full garage in it with the lift to rebuild any car. And that's what they would do. They would just rebuild cars for people who worked for the school system who needed the
Hmm.
cars fixed. And you just paid for the parts. Show me a high school now that's got an auto shop with a lift in it.
Yeah. I mean, I'd
Eh,
be interested if there's a high school that's got an auto shop. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple, but there can't be that many of them.
Well, it was Cy-Fair High School, and I noticed the Cy-Fair High School has remodeled, and their auto shop is not there anymore. It was by
Yeah.
the time my
Well,
brother and I got to high school, it was gone.
yeah. I mean that there has been and I think there has been a shift from general education to higher education
Yes.
as the country has shifted into a more technological time period
Well, there
where
was
that
the lie,
we
the Gen X lie.
there was that as well.
And okay, so what do I mean by the Gen X lie? You have to go to college to be successful. And skilled labor jobs mean you're not good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what you're looking at that is that, I mean, that's what I was told. I was told you had to go to school because that was, my parents did it and my grandparents did it, and that's sort of which is what was expected. And I also went to a, college prep private school. My kids who go to a charter school, theirs is still college prep as well, and I think most schools call themselves college prep. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal is
That's
to
basically
prepare
the
you
main
to do
lesson
that.
now.
Right.
There's
And so
that's it. It's you're college bound because you've got to be because we've got to feed the college machine.
right. And we've removed a lot of things. I mean, I didn't even get this stuff when I was in school, but like and maybe I don't remember it. It's just something that didn't stick, but like I don't remember doing personal finances. I don't remember talking about how to open a bank account and move money and deal with those sorts of things.
So
But
I
beyond
took
that, like it's also like because we removed that we don't have and we don't have shop anymore. So people don't know how to work on their own cars and we don't know
what
how
used
to
to be
fix
home
things in our
ec.
houses and yeah,
Teach
home ec.
teach you how to cook. A lot of these skills that I've had to learn since I left school that I
Hmm.
never did. Now, I do remember taking a semester long economics class, and I think they spent like a day on balancing a checkbook.
Was that in high school?
It was in high school. And maybe 2 days on balancing a checkbook, but that
I mean,
was
I'm sure
it.
we did as well, but it was.
And,
I mean, I
but most
remember
of it
doing
was
some stuff in.
macroeconomics, not micro that I needed. It was mostly the how the big stuff works. And as a high schooler, I don't need to know how the stock market works. I need
Yeah,
to know how to make a budget, pay my bills, the fact that taxes are going to come out of my paycheck. I didn't
yeah,
learn that. I mean, I knew it because my parents told me, but I didn't really find that out until I went and got a paycheck, and I went, "Where's my
yeah,
money? You
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
what's this FICA thing and all this other stuff?"
Right. Yeah.
And
Who is
yeah,
FICA and why does he get
yeah,
all my money?
money exactly. But a lot of that is gone. The ability to be a homemaker, whether you're male or female, and learn any of that in school is gone. Basic DIY skills are gone.
Right. Well,
And
all it is a place to go and have information crammed into your brain, and that's all that it is now. And I
and
think what we need to be looking at is reframing this into a more holistic experience where like, okay, because I mean think about I mean I think this is true for schools as well, but like how many businesses in China start their morning with everybody does some exercise like
I think it's more
before we
Japan.
start work. Is it Japan?
It's
I'm sorry,
Japan because I'm remembering the Michael Keaton movie where they make the cars, and that's the
yeah,
Japanese car. It is the Japanese. So, but
but like
yes,
that's
calisthenics
everybody
before work.
come to work
Yeah,
and let's all get our heart rate going and get all right, everybody's pumped up and ready to go, let's all go off to work. And I mean
yeah.
talk about a great group activity, but like the kids come to school in the morning and the first thing you do is sit them in a chair. No, the first thing you should is make them take a run, like let them out, go out and play. And
Now,
let
I
them.
will say that the one of the good things that I think the school system here has done is they have figured out a way to leverage every kid's going to get a meal for breakfast and every kid's
Yes.
going to get a meal for lunch. And I think some of this came out of COVID, but I'm not 100% sure. The school district I'm at right now, my kid has lunch every day and they have breakfast every day, and I don't have to pay for it. My taxes are paying for it, right?
No.
And it's balanced and it's healthy and it's good and it's not ketchup is your vegetable like they tried to do with the Reagans, uh, you know. But some food because I do know in this community I live in, those two meals may be the only two meals some of these kids get,
Yeah.
right, a day, and they do it
Well,
for some
then
kids over the summertime.
school should be going out to. I mean, I think school should be cover the work hours of the parents, and I think it should go all year. But I also think that there should be huge breaks. I think there should be breaks where people can take off with their kids and go away, and it's built into work schedules. Like they're
Yeah, we're getting into a whole
why
lot of
this
stuff that
isn't
would be
all
awesome.
integrated doesn't make any sense to
No,
me.
it
We
doesn't.
know that
But
everyone who works in a company's kids go to school. So why aren't y'all talking to each other? Like
yeah,
why is
and
there this wall between
there's
everything?
massive bureaucracy involved. This may piss some people off, but there's teachers unions involved who are not out for the best of the school kids. They are out for what the teachers can get. And again, I do not think teachers are compensated how they should be.
Mm-mm.
The school systems, like we've got the whole Robin Hood thing here in Texas, so we have school systems that are taxing people to bring in stuff to give half their budget or more to the state to then be redistributed in some other way to some other school system. We also have a problem in Texas specifically where, and I'm sure it's much more broad than Texas, in rural communities, the school district is the single largest employer in the town. So you've got to keep this machine going. It's a machine. It's got to keep churning it out. But I get back to respect and discipline. Without those two things, it's going to fail. And physical activity, I mean, that's another huge bit, I think. And then basic skills, right?
Yeah.
Let's not worry about college prep until everyone can read, everyone
Yeah.
can write, and everyone
Well,
can do basic math.
and
Let's
so
just do that.
here's an interesting idea that I'm sure you know the name Montessori, but
Yes,
there's
I'm
another
familiar with
one
the
as well
Montessori
that's name
schools.
does not pop into my head right now. But they approach the idea of like we're not going to worry about reading and writing until second grade. If they want to read, great, but it's not a push. It's not a thing. What we want to work on is social interaction and talking and interacting and playing and
Yeah,
learning how a society works, how a community works. Like
and that's
that's what's
important.
important.
That's an important skill, and a lot of people assume you're going to get it in preschool, right?
Mm-hmm.
They assume that that's where it's coming from. Now, my youngest, for a variety of reasons, didn't go to preschool. Basically, didn't have the money because we were in the middle of a divorce, and there was just no way to afford it because preschool ain't cheap, right? And I was too white and made too much money to qualify for the public preschool. So, and that's straight up what they told me. Said if I was any other demographic with what I made, my kid would have qualified for preschool. But because I was white and male and single, I didn't qualify. If I had been female, which I wasn't able to just claim female back then, so that wasn't a thing.
That would
Um,
have fixed that
that
problem.
would have fixed that problem. But so he missed that, and then his first year of kindergarten was COVID,
Yeah.
and it was mostly virtual. And even when they did go back to school, they got sent home like 2 days a week. So he was only really in school for a day or two, or maybe three a week on average. Um, so he didn't get what he needed. And I remember I got into a big argument with my ex because I made him repeat kindergarten. I held him back. And
Mine did too.
in Texas you can only do that in kindergarten and first grade. Those are the only two that you can do it in. And otherwise the school has to decide it, and the school never wants to decide it because it hurts their numbers
Yep.
and then they lose money. Um, but as part of this, he was showing massive signs of dyslexia and dysgraphia. He was flipping stuff. I had him test it, and they said he didn't have it, even though I was convinced he did. Well, he went back to the second year of kindergarten, and I made them test immediately. I started on it day one because it takes forever to get that done. And here's what's funny. He scored the same scores, and they said, because we have data to compare it to from last year, we now know that your son is dyslexic.
Okay.
So he was dyslexic. But because they didn't have previous data, they wouldn't put him in it. So he ended up going into the dyslexia program in kindergarten when they almost always get out of it because they don't have previous data, so they don't have to do it. And I can say the dyslexia program has helped him. He is reading better than I ever thought he would be able to. It's a thing for him. He's excited about it. We're doing street signs and road signs and all this stuff. He's reading everything, and it's kind of turned into a game for us. So
yeah. Well, my son's dyslexia is pretty much gone at this point. Like he is. I don't think his was ever that bad. I think it was his ADD as well was part of the problem. But like we got him the help he needed first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. I mean, and now he's just sort of like he can read. For the longest time he couldn't watch anything with subtitles because he just couldn't keep up.
He couldn't keep up.
And now he can. And so I was like, okay, he's good then. If he can keep up with subtitles, he's doing great.
And as someone with dysgraphia and having to fight for it, I was not going to make my kid fight for it. I was going to fight for him early because the earlier you can get on it, the better and sooner your brain adapts.
Yeah.
And you can, like your son, you can get to where you almost grow out of it if it's not so horrendous that it's, everything.
Yeah. He's got dysgraphia as well as I do too. Looking back now, looking at my handwriting and how I'm like, oh, I totally have this. I didn't know. We just thought I had bad handwriting. But I don't think that's ever going to get fixed for him or for me because everything's on keyboard now. Like, who writes by hand?
And you know what's funny?
Enough to teach yourself to get out of a thing.
What's funny about that is my dysgraphia almost doesn't exist for my typing because I took a typing class in 7th grade. And those neurons don't match like, if I can't remember how to spell something, I can type it, and it gets a lot closer. And which is just fascinating. Yeah. But if I'm on a pad and paper, I can't do nothing, and then I'll put my hands on the keyboard and it comes out. So that's weird. So we've kind of gone all over the place with this.
Talking about that, I'm going to say something on that. Earlier today, I was talking to my mom, and she said one of my teacher's names. She was looking through recipes and like, oh, this is from Mrs. So-and-so. And I was like, oh, 1st grade. And she goes, are you sure? No, I don't even know why I said that. It just came out of my mouth. Like, I don't know. I'm assuming that's correct. But like, I just said it and I don't know where it came from. Like, it's just one of those
That's
things.
Like the memory that I was telling you about earlier today, where I saw the old McDonald's thing, which was the 2-parter, the hot side hot and the cold side cold thing. Cold, and then I had that memory of my grandfather just pop into my head out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work that needs.
So it's the same thing. We both had the same thing, but mine was just a word, and yours is a whole
visual
memory.
Well, it was a whole memory played out. It wasn't even that it was visual. It was just it unlocked something that was so far back in the jumble of stuff that it all just kind of poured out, kind of thing. And totally. I think it was because it was a visual of a food item or a container for a food item.
Yeah,
so
it triggered a different.
That tied in smell and taste and touch and and it all just kind of rolled out.
Makes
But that
sense.
also brings me back to school. We're not teaching that way. We're
Mm-mm.
teaching one way. Read this thing, regurgitate this stuff, take this exam, which is written by Northeasterners who know what a mitten is. Who, and if you ask the average Texan what a mitten is, they'll go, "What the hell is a mitten? I've never seen one." Right? And
Yeah.
that's we could do a whole episode on standardized testing and how it is an abomination that needs to be burnt to the ground and destroyed. Not to give you my opinion on that in any way, shape, or form. Um,
Mm.
but when you standardize anything like that, you're going to bring out the mediocrity in society. You don't find out if someone's smart by giving them a standardized test, because intelligence is so much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we've gotten away from a lot of that. We've
Yeah.
and here's what I mean by that. When my grandfather taught shop, he had a book and he had a lesson plan, but he could adapt his stuff for his kids. He had the
Right.
freedom to change his curriculum on the fly. There were some core basics. There were objectives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like work stuff here. There were objectives that needed to be reached, and he made sure he reached those objectives. But he got to those objectives however he felt he needed to for those students, right? We are not doing that. Most lesson
You have to,
plans are
you have to
so
be,
formulaic.
but you have to be willing to trust the teacher to make appropriate changes, though.
Yes,
Because, and I don't want to go too far into this, but there is a whole group of people that you see on, on the internet who are teachers who are pushing different agendas, and I know it doesn't matter
absolutely.
what it is. But so there is a piece of like, so
And that's
there's
not the
two
worst
sides of
part of
that
it.
coin. There is,
That's not the worst part of it. The worst part of it is these teachers are taught primarily in the education system teaching theory and babysitting theory. They are not taught their subject matter by and large. If you're going to be a math teacher, you don't get a major in mathematics and then
okay,
learn to
I see
teach
what you're saying.
somewhat. And I think my ex-wife was a really good teacher,
Well,
and I'll give
I
you a reason
I
why.
can actually
Here's why.
speak to
Hold on.
this since
Give
mine
me just one
just
sec.
did this.
So let me just
Okay.
finish what I'm getting to by this. So the way my ex-wife went about it was she went to college and she didn't plan to be a teacher, and she wasn't a teacher for the first several years we were married. But she went and got a dual degree. She got a business degree, which she never really used, which is fine. But then she got a Spanish degree. She got two full majors, right? And I mean, like, she took every level of Spanish that they had, and then she did a semester in Costa Rica, taking every class in Spanish. She was massively fluent. She knew about the culture. She studied the cultures. She studied the language. She loved the language. Then she went and got her master's degree in education. And here's what's funny. The master's degree was a 18-month program that taught all of the teaching stuff that they teach in undergrad without all the undergrad BS that fills up the other 2.5 years.
Yeah.
But then they stamped masters on it. And that's how she got her teacher certification.
Yeah.
So if it's only a year and a half to get that thing you need to teach, why aren't you spending the rest of the college degree becoming a master of the subject matter that you're supposed to
Well,
be teaching?
so the problem is that some teachers teach every subject matter
And that
when you're
is a
talking
problem
about
too.
first, second, third,
Yeah, but
fourth grade.
that stuff's so much more general though.
I know,
And I
but
don't
then
mean that in an insulting way, but teaching ABCs and basic reading and basic mathematics and that stuff, I understand that teaching degree. I understand the elementary teaching degree. That makes sense to me. Okay?
yeah,
Which is what your wife does, right? She's the
right,
basic one. So I understand an elementary teaching degree. It's when we move into the single subject matter teachers
right.
that I have issues.
And the problem that you run into that is that they don't hire a history teacher. They hire
A
a
coach.
lot of schools just hire a new teacher.
Well, so it's
We have
interesting.
an opening for a history teacher, but they don't require you to have anything for it. It's just
So
there.
that
And then,
hasn't been
and
my
hang on,
experience,
let
but
me finish.
yeah,
Let me
okay.
finish. Hang on. And so, or and then they just they can move people around. So I had a math teacher one year that was my history teacher the next year. Like it
And I don't
happens. And so
and yeah, and that's the problem. I think that is a massive problem.
right,
And here's the other thing that I think is a massive problem. There are also certain subjects that most teachers don't even bother with that I think are really important, like history, because usually history is the coach's spot, at least in
yeah,
Texas. They give them health or history. Very rarely will you see a coach. It happens. Teach physics. Now, I did have one. He was our tennis coach.
I had one too.
Yeah, he was our tennis coach. But our tennis team was like 12 people total, boys and girls. So it wasn't a huge aspect. Uh, the point I'm getting to is I feel like the education would be better if, at least in higher levels, the teacher had more experience with the actual skill set they're teaching and didn't
I mean,
move around.
obviously that would always be better than
And that's
not. But I
part of
mean,
how they used to do it. They used
well,
to hire
I
a
mean,
physics teacher or at least a science teacher that was competent
yeah.
in physics. And I guess I got lucky because the high school I went to, my chemistry teacher had a master's in chemistry. So she could have been a chemist, but she decided to teach. The English teachers were dedicated English teachers, right? There were a lot of people who they
And you
didn't
get that
move.
in private schools. It's just not. It's not happening in the public schools. And what we're sort of we you get to that point when you start looking at things like different socioeconomic groups have better schools than other ones,
And I also went
and
to a bigger, wealthier school district, so
yeah.
yeah, that
So
didn't have to
there
move
is
people
that to
around to
it.
cover that.
Yeah.
Um,
But this is massive. This is a
yeah, there's
massive
so
thing.
much we could dig into in this.
And I think the big piece that we're getting at is that there's definitely something wrong.
Yes, it's not
So
working.
something is happening, and it's and we need to get. We'll do a whole other one on this, but like social media is breaking school, like just in general, like
Social media is breaking school. Um, Pay rates are breaking school. I mean, let's just mention this. The Austin Independent School District is thinking about building low income housing for teachers to live in
yeah,
to try and get them to come to work there. Think
yeah.
about that. They're talking about building an entire low income housing project just for their low income teachers because they can't get people because Austin is so expensive to live in now.
Yeah.
And that just tells you the whole system's broken. We don't respect teachers as a nation in any way, shape, or form.
We don't anymore. I mean,
No, we don't anymore.
Something happened. 'Cause I remember when it happened. I remember when that in at the end of the '90s, I
Hmm.
remember started hearing my mom talking about things where it was just
The
like
parents attacking the teacher
parents
for
having
my
unrealistic
yeah.
expectations, and there's a million stories online about
I didn't
parents
catch
getting
that.
it. But yeah,
Because I graduated in '96, and if you got bad grades, they might go, well, why is he performing poorly?
yeah,
And then the teacher would say something, and the parent would go, well, you need to perform better. But
right.
then it
That was
by the
still.
by the early aughts, that had flipped like 180 degrees. So
And so
um,
now, and so what happened was what I feel like happened was you had a lot of teachers who got into the point of going like, I'm tired of this, not of like I do everything I can and it's still my fault, like, or
yes,
whatever, and I think we lost a
little
lot of
Jimmy
people.
hasn't done an assignment all year, plays on his phone, and
Won't
then
do what I ask him to
won't do
do,
what
is
I ask. And
disruptive in
if I try
class,
to
is
take the
keeping
phone
every.
away, flips a desk over, and you want to know why he's got a 50 because I can't give him a zero.
Yeah. And now I'm in the principal's office with the parents and yelling at me, trying to defend the decision that I've made. And the principal's looking at me like this is my fault. And
Yeah, why
and
did you
then they're
put
like,
this
well,
on my
fine.
plate? Yeah.
I'm just not going to do this anymore. And I don't know if that happened to everybody, but I feel like
It's happening a lot.
that's happened,
It's
and
we
so
we should be able to say that. It's happening a lot to a lot of teachers. And this is a huge part, not just the pay, but this utter disrespect is why we're having a teacher shortage.
yeah. Well, and then you have to wonder if you're going to go into a classroom and you're going to be treated that way, why what's and then you have to wonder, what are you here because you're all you want to do is teach, or are you here because you have another agenda, you
Or
know
yeah, or there were a lot of people who were told, and they bought this hook, line, and sinker, go into teaching. It's easy. You get 3 months off a year. And my
hmm
God, that's a lie. How many unpaid days did your wife have to do and my wife have to go to conferences and schools and certifications and whatever? It was like a third of the summer. So a third of their
yeah
break was free labor getting recertified,
yeah
you
yeah
know?
well, and they have to, and coming in on other days and working in the classroom, and they don't give them time to get the classroom ready, not
No,
to
they
the
don't.
expectation that they have. They don't give them 5 days to get ready. They give them
And
four
then,
hours and then
dude,
expect them to come in on the
where are
weekends
the
and do it.
thousands of dollars a year I spent out of my pocket from my salary paying for school supplies for my ex-wife's classroom,
Yeah.
right? Because the school didn't have it, and
Yeah.
we're not talking about poor school districts either. We were talking about some of the wealthiest school districts in Texas, right? But no, I had to go buy a new computer for her because the one they had was 16 years old and took 2.5 hours to boot.
Yeah.
You know, I had to go
Let's
buy
start there.
pencils for her.
We take we flip the entire budget. Let's give the military the education budget, and let's
Yeah,
give the
yeah.
educations the military budget, and we'll see how that works.
But see, I also don't think that money fixes everything because
No.
we see some of these budgets, and then we see, and we haven't even gotten to this. Look at the administration that's so top heavy that
Yeah.
100 administrators make as much as you know
A
a,
thousand
a
teachers. Yeah.
thousand teachers, right? Let's cap those salaries. If your teacher's going to make 50 grand a year, then so does the superintendent.
Yeah.
You know. Um.
Set a
Anyway,
percentage. The superintendent can't make more than 10% more than the
the
teacher,
teachers do.
20% more than the teacher.
Or
Set a number so that their salary is dependent upon is all starts with the base teacher salary is X. Everything is based percentage off
percentage
of
off of
that.
that, yeah.
So the only way to give a raise to the top person is to give a raise to the bottom person.
Or maybe,
That's how it should all be structured.
maybe we should be doing these budgets not based on school system. Maybe we should be doing these budgets based on the state, and that way, all the money goes to one central place and then is divvied out equally to all the schools, right? Instead of each, because at least in Texas, I don't know how it works everywhere else. In Texas, each school district sets its own tax rate, and then
Right.
taxes you based on that, and it can be really high with some of these bond packages and things that get done. There's so much here that we could get into. We've barely
And we
scratched the
will.
surface. We will, and I do want to say we're going to talk to a lot of our teacher friends, and I wanted to let everybody know some of our teacher friends we have invited on, but they don't want to come on because they're afraid if they say their opinion, it could hurt their job. So we're going to do something different than what we've done before. We're going to start talking to some people on background, right? And we're going to come up with questions. We're going to do the whole thing because if anyone ever wants to talk and have their opinion expressed, but they're afraid it could hurt their job, just let us know. We'll talk to you, and then we'll throw the opinions out like they're ours. You know, I'm more than happy to take flack for somebody who needs an anonymous way to complain.
Yeah,
So just to throw that
absolutely.
out there, and something else that we didn't do. Um, Please subscribe, please review and rate. Um, we're not trying to make a fortune on the podcast, but we'd like to try and get some better mics and stuff, and we don't have the budget to do it from what we make because inflation is inflation. Uh, But and please go comment. We have a place for y'all to comment, at least on Spotify. We've got the Discord, and all the other things will be linked in there. We have the YouTube channel. If you want to go comment there, tell us how crazy we sound, or whatever. If you agree, disagree, let us know. We'd love to hear from everybody.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.